Today I'll be talking about the historical development of adjectives in Japanese. It is really useful to look at this historical development because it helps us to understand how and why Japanese adjectives work the way that they do. So, to start, in modern Japanese there are two types of adjectives. The first is known as keiyoshi. These are what your textbook will refer to as e adjectives. For example, kawaii and tanoshii are e adjectives. The second type of adjective in modern Japanese is keiyodoshi adjectives. These are your na adjectives, such as shizukana and kireina. Let's look at the kanji of these words to help us understand what we are being told. Keiyoshi. This is made up of kei, meaning shape, yo, meaning looks, and shi, which means a part of speech. These three kanji together mean something like the part of speech which tells you what the shape looks like. This is rather logical, as an adjective describes a noun. It tells you what the shape of a noun looks like in a way. By telling you it is a big dog, you understand the shape of the noun, which is dog. Keiyodoshi is going to be a little bit more complex. The translation of keiyodoshi is adjectival noun. However, this is a bit of a lie. The first two characters are the same, shape and looks. However, doshi means verb. Surely a verb is different from a noun. After doing some reading, all I can say is that it is linguistically a very complex issue. I've taken a small snippet from the Japanese Wikipedia page for what a keiyodoshi is. The snippet informs us that the name keiyodoshi itself is disputed. The page itself is very long and presents different arguments from Japanese linguistic authors on what a keiyodoshi actually is. Because of this, I wouldn't think of it too hard. If Japanese linguists can't even agree, then it's best, from a learning point of view, not to get too bogged down in these debates. Just understand that keiyodoshi are your na adjectives in modern Japanese. So, to summarize, in modern Japanese there are two types of adjectives, keiyoshi, e adjectives, and keiyodoshi, na adjectives. Now, let's look to the past. In classical Japanese, keiyoshi and keiyodoshi adjectives were different. Today we're just going to look at what keiyoshi adjectives were like in classical Japanese. So, we nowadays have just the singular e adjective, but in classical Japanese, e adjectives, keiyoshi, was split into two types of adjectives, ku and shiku adjectives. Despite having two different names, these two types of adjectives are incredibly similar. I'm going to put up a table showing the conjugations of these two adjectives. Please ignore where it says base form and caddy form for now. I'll explain that in a bit. So, the reason they are called shiku and ku adjectives is because of the ren-yo-kei form. Notice how the ren-yo-kei form for ku adjectives is just ku, and for shiku adjectives it is shiku. This is where the naming convention comes from. If you look at the colours, notice how everything in blue is exactly the same between the two adjectives. Shiku adjectives conjugate exactly the same as ku adjectives. They just have shi put at the front of them. In modern Japanese, the distinction between ku and shiku adjectives has been lost, but you can see remnants of the old system in the way Japanese adjectives are written, notably if you look at the okurigana. Okurigana is just the name of the hiragana that attaches to a kanji. For example, in tanoshii, the shi and i are the okurigana. If an adjective is spelt with a shi and i, such as tanoshii, then it comes from a shiku adjective historically. If the adjective is just spelt with i, it is from a ku adjective. For example, takai is a ku adjective as it has no shi. Historically, ku adjectives were used to describe the physical nature of something. Aoshi, for example, was a ku adjective meaning blue. Shiku adjectives, in comparison, were less objective and were used more so for describing feelings and sensations. For example, koto mesurashi meant something unusual and was a Shiku adjective. Now, let's return to base and carry form. What does this mean? The base form or carry form of the adjective would be chosen depending on what the adjective was connecting to. The carry form is not an alien thing though. I believe what happened was there was originally the base form of these adjectives. For example, let's look at the Renyoke form of Ku adjectives. A reminder that the Renyoke form is the continuative form. We have both Ku and Kari. I believe originally you could just use the base form Ku as the Renyoke form. For example, you could say blah blah blah, aoku, blah blah blah. My classical Japanese knowledge isn't good enough to write my own sentence, but the point of the blah blahs is to show how aoshi is in the middle of the sentence and is being used in the middle in its continuative form. However, when a ku adjective was being used alongside ari, the verb meaning to exist in classical Japanese, there was an onbin, a sound change. Therefore, when the Renyoke form of aoshi was being used with ari, it became aokari. This onbin, this sound change, when ku and ari combine, is consistent throughout the table. For example, in the table, kara comes from ku ara, kari, as we just discussed, comes from ku ari, and karu comes from ki aru. I believe these to be correct, but again, my classical Japanese knowledge is not perfect, so if there are any mistakes, please let me know. Now we have all this classical Japanese knowledge and context. How is it actually relevant or helpful in understanding modern Japanese? Well, there are a few modern grammar forms that can be explained by understanding Shiku and Ku adjectives. So, the first way that it's helpful to know the background of Shiku and Ku adjectives is to look at a very early phrase we learn in Japanese. Arigatou gozaimasu. Now, when you start learning Japanese, this phrase seems a bit random. What is arigatou? What is gozaimasu? What's going on here? Well, here's how we answer that question. There is an old-fashioned polite form of an adjective that's made by combining the Renyoke form of an adjective and attaching it to gozaimasu. Let's look at arigatou gozaimasu then. So first, we need to find out what arigatou is. When we search for it in a classical Japanese dictionary, we find that it's from the ku adjective arigatashi, which existed in classical Japanese. You recognize the end adjective. It is katashi, which is the archaic form of the modern katai, meaning hard or difficult. Katashi has gone through the phenomenon of rendaku, so has turned into gatashi. I've covered what rendaku is before, so won't go over it here again. Arigatashi was put into the Renyoke form and became arigataku. The polite verb gozaimasu was then put at the end. An onbin sound change also occurred, in which the ku in arigataku became u, giving us arigatao. Then there was a final onbin sound change that turned arigatao into arigatou, giving us arigatou gozaimasu. This is the same phenomenon that occurs in the phrase ohayo gozaimasu. The next thing that is relevant to modern Japanese adjectives is that the rentaike form, the attributive form of Shiku and Ku adjectives, gives us the modern dictionary form of adjectives. Let's look at utsukushi, which was a Shiku adjective. Its rentaike form was utsukushi ki. A later sound change in Japanese is that this ki sound in the rentaike form eventually became an e. So utsukushi became utsukushi, which is the standard dictionary form of the adjective. Well, I hope that was an interesting dive into the history of Japanese adjectives. To wrap it all up, there are two main types of adjectives in modern Japanese: keiyoshi and keiyodoshi adjectives. I adjectives and na adjectives, respectively. Na adjectives have their own interesting history, so I'll look at those next time. E adjectives in the past were split up distinctively into Ku and Shiku adjectives. Ku adjectives are used for the physical appearance of things, and Shiku adjectives more for feelings, which is why modern words like tanoshi, which means fun, come from Shiku adjectives, as this is a feeling. And this is why aoi, meaning blue, comes from aoshi, a Ku adjective. However, in modern Japanese, this distinction has largely been lost.